Kaya, Wanju. My name's Graham Bordley. I'm the Director of Midwifery Nursing and Patient Support Services. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all today to our bush medicine panel. We have some fantastic experts behind me who will speak to you very shortly. But I would like to pay a particular welcome to Auntie Viv Henson, who's joined us today to give us her wisdom and the culture associated with bush medicine. So welcome once again, Auntie Viv. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. It is a privilege to be standing on Noongar country. I'll now hand over to Danielle Thurlow, who will be your MC for today.
Today we make history, and we acknowledge that this history is being made on Whadjuk country. As we make history, may we remember the people who have paved the way before us, and may we continue to pay respect to elders past and present. I want to offer you all a trigger warning. There's some parts in this conversation might surface some stuff. It's totally okay. Nothing kind of scary that's going to happen. I want to also acknowledge, but just it's important for you to notice what does come up. Those things are going to be key for us moving forward with knowing what kind of conversations needs to happen. And I want to remind you just a bit, please be kind to yourself and to others. I also want to remind us that we cannot afford to lose momentum. We must continue to get up, stand up, show up for systemic change, and keep rallying around our mob, our elders, and our communities. For tens and thousands of years, Aboriginal people have relied on natural remedies to treat a variety of illnesses. And thankfully, many of those remedies are still being used today. The Women and Newborn Health Service 2021 Reconciliation Panel had our staff speaking about the long waiting need to have bush medicine accepted and implemented as part of clinical practice and services offered here at King Eddie's. So today we have framed the panel around two articles. Got them in my hand here. One is called Building Partnerships for Linking Biomedical Science with Traditional Knowledge of Customary Medicines, and a case study that was done with 2 Australian Indigenous communities. The second one is Indigenous Peoples Innovation, Intellectual Property Pathways to Development. So on our panel we have Head of Department for Gynae Oncology, Professor Lee Yong. We've got Consultant for Gynae Oncology, Professor Emma Allenson. We have Michael Petrowski, Chief Pharmacist of Pharmacy. And John Day, Manager for Quality Consumer Liaison Unit. Let me correct that. Manager of Consumer Liaison Unit for Quality, Safety and Performance. And to represent the Aboriginal voice, we have Auntie Viv, one of the senior women connected to Whadjuk and Balagang nations, who was taught about using bush medicine as a child from a family. She has completed Certificate in Bush and Western Herbal Medicines, is the first Aboriginal member of the National Herbalist Association of Australia, and an accomplished author of bush medicine. Gee, I thought you'd be getting that sort quite a lot. And it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for being part of the panel. So firstly, I want to turn to you, Auntie Viv, and I want to know if you could tell us a little bit about what's closest to your heart in your body of work. So Auntie Viv has a little bit of hearing stuff, so sometimes we may need to come in if you're wondering why I'm coming closer. I want to know what's close to your heart when it comes to your body of work.
Kai ni chingan European ngalakatat ni chingan kabajak buja ngan European ngan wangi no ngalaka wabrani ngalaka. Hi everyone, I'm happy to be here and also to talk to you about things that heal us. I'm very I'm very committed to learning more myself and passing on knowledge of bush medicine to the wider community. I think it's really important because it looked after our people for hundreds and hundreds of years. And even during days of settlement, a lot of our families were unable to seek medical attention in Western society, but they were able to look after themselves. My knowledge of bush medicine and what was around them. And in our Aboriginal families, there were also the healers. There were people who actually specialised in looking after each other. They knew more about medicine than the next person. And even though everyone's quoting me as being an expert, I really don't see myself as an expert. I just think that I've acquired knowledge over the years that I want to pass on, but even at my age, I've still got a lot to learn as well.
Beautiful. Sounds like there's a lot of knowledge that you hold inside yourself that you'd love to pass on, and possibly there's something in what we're trying to achieve here that can assist you with that. And I hope that we can get through that to a path like that for generations to come. I want to ask you another question, Ivy, before I move to anybody else on this panel. And I want to first also read about some things that I've read inside this article. It said, while there have been efforts to integrate traditional bush medicines into modern medicine and healthcare globally, there remains a lack of centralised response to this commitment in Australia, partly due to the serious ethical concerns around intellectual property, virus prospecting and benefit sharing that have led to increased mistrust and lack of cooperation between traditional knowledge holders and biomedical sciences. The paper contributes to the discussion about ways to establish ethical cooperation, and what I found interesting is they acknowledge that traditional knowledge has been maintained through intergenerational oral knowledge through transmission, and more recently has been documented to prevent loss, further erosion in post-colonial Australia. What's the risk in losing the process of gaining knowledge through oral tradition?
If you have it passed down orally, and you're so like you get taken out bush, and you're walking along, and the oldies will point out a certain plant, and they will say you only pick the leaves off that at a certain time of the year, and this is what it's used for. You walk along a little bit further and they'll tell you about something else, and sometimes it may not just be the plants as well. So when you're sitting around a fire and you've got a really big hot fire going and you've got these really red coals because they're really hot, and then you've got the ashes, and then they would tell us that those ashes, they're so clean that you can put them on your wounds. So you learn all of that orally growing up. And some of those comments that you were making about ownership, etc., I think it's really important that we have those conversations around acknowledging who are the knowledge holders, and how I think it's important that we somehow come together and our community retain their knowledge and retain, sometimes I can't remember the words that I want to say, I'm sorry, but on the other side of the coin, that the Western world looks at us acknowledging what we have to bring and help us maintain that ownership. Does it make sense? So we've been taught that it's our job to share, and so a lot of people say, well, you really don't have copyright to that knowledge because, you know, it's part of your culture to hand it on. But at the same time, you have to respect that we had no idea of exploitation and ownership. And at the moment, I know that in Western Australia that every plant that grows is owned by the government, so they can say A or nay as to what you do with that plant, and they've already sold the rights of a well-known plant that we knew as Noongar people that was good for treating cancer. So how do we say, no, that's our knowledge that you're selling and no benefit comes back to our community? I think that's wrong. And at the same time, for a person like myself who, works with bush medicine, I would like to see the day where I sit down with someone in pharmaceuticals, someone head of oncology. What do we have here that we can work together on to help our community, help patients who are suffering with cancer? How can we make their journey a lot gentler and less painful with knowledge from both sides of the fence, our Aboriginal knowledge and Western science? Because Western science has taken a huge step and leaps and bounds, and all the things, machineries, whatever they have nowadays to keep our patients going. But from the very beginning, we all know that medicine came from the plants, and we have to look after the plants to keep that going. And when we have people are given tablets and needles, etc., made in a lab, it's probably a lot easier, and the dosage is, so much better than the old days where you have a handful of this and a handful of that. But and when they do use, like a plant, they just maybe take one component out of that plant to put in medication. So at the same time, all the other components in that plant that help balances the body when they're taking it, that's taken out when they go through the pharmaceutical process of getting that little component that might help cure cancer or something else. And so the body suffers. We all know the after effects that some medication causes when patients are receiving treatment for certain illnesses. So I think it's an opportunity for us to try and balance that out.
I will start using the microphone so it's easier for you. Yeah, that's so what I'm hearing from you is that there is a real need to make sure that how we go about implementing bush medicine is done in a way where relationship is a big part of it, because what I heard you say is a lot of what's happening right now is big and fast, but it's not actually real or human enough to feel that it is probably too fast and too big. And so I just want to check, it's what you're saying is that it's important that we realise that and find a really healing way of moving forward so that we can implement it truly without the exploitation of the Aboriginal people.
I think when I was doing the course over at Barbara Ridge Foundation, I wanted to do the health workers course because I was caring for my mother-in-law who had cancer, and they said, we've got no vacancies, Viv, but you can do this bush medicine course. And I sort of rolled my eyes and thought, okay. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was like a lot of memory came back from when I was growing up as a kid, living out in the country. My grandfather was still alive and my grandmother, and so we were fortunate to learn a lot of things from the old people, which was really good. And I've lost my train of thought. But I just thought doing that course, there was a lot of information about bush medicine from up the top end of Australia, from Central Desert and everywhere else. Very limited information on Noongar bush medicine. It was sort of like, I'm thinking, we got more information than this. It's got to be more than that. And my mum was still alive, and I went home and had a yarn with her one day, and I said, Mum, I'm doing this course. I said, but there's not a lot of info about bush medicine. I said, I think I might have a crack at writing a book, eh? And Mum's always used to, her favourite saying was little girly, so she said, well, you better get to it, little girly. And so I started writing down what I could remember, and then if there was a plant that, you know, was growing in Noongar country and I wasn't too sure about, I'd go up and I'd say, Mum, what can you remember about this plant? Did you remember using it as a kid growing up, you know? Did Granddad tell you what to do with it? And sometimes she would say, I can tell you that. Other times she would say, no, I don't remember. So it was really hit and miss with the community. And then, a few people said, well, what do you want to do that for, Viv? You know, you've given all our secrets away. So there's still that mistrust out there in our community as well. And to me, it wasn't about giving the secrets away, but gathering this information to show that we as Noongar people, yes, we do have bush medicine. The knowledge is still there. And I wanted to leave that as a legacy to my family and to my community. And I'm just really amazed at how that's just, gone all over the place kind of thing. It's everyone, not everyone, but there are quite a few people that have really thanked me for doing that. And I think there's a lot more information out there that needs to be gathered and recorded, because if we don't start recording it now, we're going to lose that, because, when we spoke earlier, our language information has always been oral. And some of that now, like people from my generation, we're probably the last of what we call the reserve kids who grew up on the reserve, running around the bush. And like my children, they grew up with a roof near a house. My grandchildren are growing up in houses, so they're missing out on what we had when we were growing up. So I think it's important that now we have to start recording it, but learning and working together towards not so much me reaping benefits from that knowledge, but the benefits being shared amongst all our community. And I think I've spoken far too much.
Thank you. You've had a whole wealth of knowledge that's very, very important for this space. Just want to say that there is quite a lot of things that needs to be considered that we don't know in this space. So to hold that conversation and value that conversation is needed is possibly the first thing that we need to do by the sounds of it. I will move on to our next panellists, Professor Yee and Professor Emma. There's, again, I want to start by reading from what I found in the article before I turn to you for your question. There was 3 things that stood out for me. First one, in response to concerns about the increasingly popular bush foods, the Rural Industry Research and Development Corporation released a report on the safety of Australian bush foods. This report compiled evidence to enhance broader acceptance. 2, Aboriginal people's health and well-being is often associated with cultural connection to their country and can be reluctant to experience the Western health system or even experience problems accessing it in that same instance. Thirdly, similarly, without scientific evaluation, there can be reluctance by health professionals to acknowledge the safety, effectiveness and value of bush medicines. If we have reports like this to enhance broader acceptance, and we commonly know that cultural connection to country is important, it makes me wonder why reluctance still exists. What are your thoughts on reluctance that surrounds this topic? And do you have any idea why we would find reluctance in health professionals? Is anyone that wants to start first?
Firstly, thank you, Auntie Viv. It's such a privilege to learn from you today. I think when I read those articles, Danielle, and when Yee and I had discussions, a few things came up, and I think maybe this contributes initially to that reluctance is that people forget how much oncology comes from plant-based medicine. We're acutely aware as oncologists that many of the things we did started in plants. Paclitaxel, one of our common chemotherapies, comes from the bark of the Pacific yew tree. Doxorubicin was found in the soil around a castle in Italy. So lots of our origin comes from plant-based medicine. And, we're very acutely aware of both that and that there is capacity to expand that moving forward. But I think maybe some of the reluctance comes from people not remembering where medicine started and thinking that it did start in a lab. I think the other thing that, and Auntie Viv and I talked about this beforehand, is that we have a group of oncology, our patients as oncology patients are reasonably unique compared to some other medical patients in that even when we complete all their treatment, because that treatment is radical surgery and chemotherapy and radiotherapy, a lot of our patients have ongoing symptoms, and Auntie Viv talked about some of the experiences of her family members when we were chatting before, and so we have a group of patients for whom we need to give symptom care to that we often do not always that well at. And I think that's a unique opportunity here for where we can be a part of that conversation, what we need to give to our patients that we don't necessarily always give to them. Even though you were very humble, Auntie Viv, you're very clearly an expert in this. And Yi and I are very clearly not experts in bush medicine. But what we are experts in, and I think we do really well, is that we often say we don't work in silos, we're a big team, and our skill set comes in that we advocate for all members of our team and all patients in our team. And so I think there's probably lots of reasons for reluctance, but I think what we can bring to this is that we will advocate for all members of the team, including Auntie Viv, in looking at how we can move this conversation forward and advocate for all members of our patients, in particular our Indigenous patients who, as you say, often need that cultural connection as part of their medical care that we probably don't do very well all of the time.
Thank you, and thank you, Auntie Viv. I echo exactly what Emma said, so thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. The interesting thing is that Western medicine is very much based, particularly in oncology, which is what we're talking about, cancer, that to introduce something, it has to be part of a clinical trial. You have to demonstrate that this drug that you're giving or this compound that you're giving is superior and is going to give better results. And I think that's where a lot of the reluctance that you talk about in terms of medical health workers, they're concerned about introducing something which potentially may be damaging or causing problems without the proven efficacy of it. The type of patients that Emma also touched on were not the ones that we're talking about, where we're talking about potentially life-saving first-line treatment, but supplementary medicines. I come from a Chinese background, so traditional Chinese medicine is very much part of, I use certain balms that you can't sort of buy. I drink raw tea, which, you don't drink too much of that because it can have some funny effects. So you can actually use other compounds in a supportive way, and the type of patients where we may be looking to introduce some of the bush medicines are the patients who are symptomatic and they are needing supportive care. The current therapies available for treating their pain or whatever symptoms they have, it's not working. So clearly whatever we have is not working and we need some other options. And that's where I think we can actually really sort of target in the first instance. The clinical trials, they're trying to work out what the compound is that is active in paclitaxel, which is what we talked about before, takes a lot of scientific endeavour and research and money, and that's where big pharma comes in, and that's where the reluctance is going to be. So it's sort of a bit two-edged. We can understand why there's reluctance, but we can also see opportunities.
Thank you very much. So what really is important here is that we push a level of education so that a lot of our staff and our people who are trying to push this initiative understands what it is that we need to be educating so that the doors open up much more in terms of the reluctance in some spaces, because maybe we haven't exactly done enough of the work to have that material for educating. So this is what I'm hearing. Am I right in saying that that's probably the biggest thing that needs to happen when it comes to reluctance, and that's the fact that that's probably the major thing when it comes to reluctance existing?
Look, I think what you're doing today is the first step, which is raising awareness. So if there's not an awareness that there are options out there, then there is no way forward. But by raising the fact that there are some options, and drawing on the experience and drawing on the information that we have, there is an opportunity to do so, to move forward and overcome some of that reluctance.
Has anybody else in this room got anything else that they want to add or say or ask with what you've heard so far? This goes for the people on the online as well. We'll come back to you. We've got one in the room who has got a question, and then we'll check for anyone online.
Thank you. What a beautiful selection of people we have in front of us. First of all, as a emerging leader and upcoming Aboriginal person in this space, I pay my respects to Auntie Viv, and I thank her for writing that book. Me, as a woman in my 40s, I've had the privilege to go to university. A lot of people earlier than me didn't have that education. So when we, look at things, she should be very proud of herself because she's the author of her own work. So when we're sitting at master's degree levels and going on to our PhDs, that is our goal, to be master authors of our own work, so that we've evidenced it, we've proven it. It's been in that space where it's been in that university area. My first thing is, at a tertiary level, there's a lot of primary things before they get there. So before they get to you, they, kind of come to us. And one story from my family, because I also make bush medicines, what kind of cancer? They're like lymph nodes type cancer. And talking about positive, outlook and, not feeding those negative thoughts and being positive. The young man is still going very positive and very strong, and he had faith and belief in his medicines. The only time he really attended the hospital was when he had high temperatures. Then his GP and doctor, well, what are you doing that's so different? Oh, don't worry about what I'm doing. I'm having my bush medicine. So that kind of had that faith in that, but exploring, like you said, you have to do them trials, but it's already been happening under your noses before it even hits a tertiary area, where people, might given an Aboriginal person, not just about the physical, and I think yourself, Professor Yee, being from a cultural thing as well, there's cultural phenomena, there's cultural, people can close their eyes, they can feel, they can sense. It's just almost like an X-ray, the machines are doing the work. But, there's still some people that live that traditional ways of life, and it's good to see that in Australia that we're coming out, we're showing that. When you talk about going back to the history of health, I always study the Indigenous populations and how it's being reintroduced back into the health stream system. My first thing that I learned in my public health was, where did health start from? Some people got to go, let's try this, let's try that, let's try that. And then the universities and all these people got together, let's try to, see how we can, figure out how to help this. But from the Indigenous point of view, when the do-gooders came in, they got sicker and sicker because they took away the things that kept them well for millions of years. So this opportunity to, we've come 360 and we're back to this, and we're all living in a shared world. And like we said, we do share our knowledge, and if we work in collaboration with each other, then that acknowledgement has to be, if you're trying to deliver something new to a person of a certain race, you have to be inclusive of and diversity. So like an Aboriginal person, they can have their Aboriginal collaboration with, the knowledge holders of that, not necessarily in that big academic space, but more in that practical space. And being that guide, because that's where you're going to get that trust. And I think that when anyone gets told and they hear that big word, the big C word, it becomes very scary to a lot of people. So they automatically zone out. So they need to, trust in the doctor that's delivering that news to them and how they're going to take care of them from that point onwards. So, and as I was saying, when we do things at that primary level, sometimes people don't have access. We talk about access and equity. Some people don't go to the hospitals because they know what they're doing at home is helping them. So it's good that, we all work together. And, Auntie Viv empowers us as young people, and then we hope to empower their thoughts, because their things have been around a lot longer than what we've been, living. So to support that as up and coming is something very special to be part of, and it's not going to get lost.
Thank you. And this is the beautiful example of why oral tradition is probably something that's important, because it's all that interaction that we get that a book or an academic piece of paper probably doesn't capture. Anyone on the space, on the online space? No one on the online space? That's all good. Let's move on. Oh, you've got one? Yes?
Thank you, Auntie Viv, panel.
Yeah,
Back there. To go there. I don't know anything about this area, but I wish to ask, and as you were talking about there, obviously some people in our communities will be coming in and they'll have taken some bush medicine. Is there, as kind of a doctor working in that space, is there a way that we can be culturally respectful about asking people about what they've used, and how is it best to kind of ask patients about this stuff?
I apologise, guys, but the old
Ask the question again.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm mindful that some people in communities will have come in and they'll have taken bush medicine because they're using that as an adjunct to their treatment, but then they come into the health system as well. And usually as doctors, when we're talking to patients, we say what medications you're on, and they probably won't share that information with us because we're not asking about it directly. And I wish to ask, is there a culturally sensitive way that we can bring up this stuff?
Like one of the things when someone approaches me for some bush medicine, I always ask, what do you need it for, and are you on any medication? Who's your doctor, etc. And a lot of people who've come to me for bush medicine for cancer, it's fantastic that a lot of the doctors encourage them to use the bush medicine along with their medication, and I do the same thing. Don't stop taking your medication, just take the two together. If this bush medicine causes any disruption, makes you ill or whatever, discontinue the use as well. Don't keep taking it just for the sake of taking it. I also make a nice little cream for eczema. And one of the things that I say is this may not cure you, but it may help you. So I never promise miracles for people, but there's a lot of our mob who just want to use the bush medicine. And as my niece was saying, when our mob get close, when they're told they've got the big C cancer, they sort of like, a lot of them put their life on hold. They are really scared because we've seen so many of our family, pass on through cancer, and they don't think that there's life after being diagnosed. But there are a lot of people who just want to drink the bush medicine, and they've been on it for years and years and years, and they're still surviving with their cancer. If I answered.
Yeah, I guess the question I was interested in was, what's the best way that we can ask patients if they're using bush medicine? Should we just be as simple as that and say, are you taking bush medicine?
I think have a discussion with them anyway, and if it's having a positive effect on it, let them continue. If there's an option that you can meet with the person who's making the bush medicine to, discuss that, that would be good. So when my sister was in here with cancer last year, she had a very rare cancer that was attacking her kidneys and liver. When she was in hospital, she was doing Western medicine. When she was home, she was doing Western medicine, and she insisted on me giving her the medicine to drink. And one of the bush medicines that they like to drink as a tea is the one called Scaevola spinescens. It's got a couple of different names, currant bush, fanflower bush or whatever. That's been a well-known remedy that our people have used for cancer. So she was drinking that, and because of the pain, she would like to be massaged with a rub that I would make that would help her with the pain. So she was able to use both, and her medical team knew about that, and they encouraged her to do that. But unfortunately, the cancer was too far advanced, and it was a very aggressive cancer. So the bush medicine didn't really help stop the growth of that cancer. So it's just, of the patient and their doctor just having that little conversation, sitting having a yarn about what they're doing and how they're feeling, and the improvement that it's making to their health. Sometimes it's just like when people are given a placebo, this will make you feel good, so they'll continue to drink it even if it's not making a difference. Sometimes the mind is very powerful medicine too. It can make a big difference.
Sometimes we overthink how we should ask a question. Yeah, so just ask it, yeah. And be respectful of the patient's choice. That's basic, yeah. There was something interesting that you said, actually. Doulas in our hospitals, not only birthing doulas, but death doulas, and using medicines to calm the social emotional well-being so that, the patient is getting that part of it. Just a thought.
Yeah. Just on continuing with that, I wanted a question with the pharmacist as well.
Yeah, we'll just get to the next one, because we are going to go with the pharmacies, and when we get there, I'll come back to you. Is that okay? Beautiful. And we have Sam Garlett online who has a question. Sam, would you like to ask your question before we move forward?
Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you, Tani Viv, for sharing, and all the panel members. I'm a Noongar man from Perth here, Wajak Baladong, like Honey Viv as well. My mum is her cousin, Cynthia Garlett, and I just wanted to, I guess from our point of view, we just wanted to sort of ask some questions around, or make a note around people accessing both bush medicine and Western medicine, and I guess the coming together of the two worlds and what that looks like moving forward. And I mean, what a better way to sort of, I guess, address that at NAIDOC, or NAIDOC week, given all the changes that are happening within the Western side of things, I guess. But I just wanted to hand over to Tony Nola to ask our question that we originally wanted to ask.
Cool. So thank you, it's Nola here, and I've had the pleasure of Viv and Viv's knowledge being brought into the South Metro Health Service. So we're sitting over here in the South. The information is really, really important, and one of the things with having Viv come into the health service for the last 5-6 years, it's actually raised the understanding of bush medicines and what that looks like, and it's been a real pleasure. But it's also increased the uptake because we have it come in on a regular basis. It provides that to not only our patients but consumers. But I'm really interested to know, is there a plan, given what Viv says, to look at bush medicines and the properties as in the pharmaceutical space, because we do have a lot of our consumers, community accessing it, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal.
Thank you for your question. That was one around pharmacy. So we've got two eager questions around pharmacy, and I will give you the choice. There is a question around this later. Would you like to weave it in then, or would you like to answer now?
I could probably answer parts of it.
Parts of it?
Yeah.
So the question online was, is there a plan to start to get the bush medicines recognised in the pharmaceutical world? Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
I think there's a couple of different aspects to how you think about combining those two ideas of, or those two different parts of more Western medicine and more bush medicine, and whether or not that crosses over into the boundary where Western medicine draws a line and sort of says Western medicine is on this side and then complementary medicines are over here, and then what sort of part does that play? For when you're looking at incorporating something where you want certainty around treatment and that is important to the patient outcome, Western medicine has a very high bar. That's when it calls itself a medicine, and you have to go through that rigorous process to get to that point. And I think there's quite a lot of examples of where that has eventuated to that point. So you might have had a plant-based product which might have been doxorubicin or paclitaxel or morphine or digoxin, all those types of things. They've got quite a high bar, and when you're taking that, you want that certainty that it has that effect. And I think the concerns around using that knowledge and taking it into that space where it does have a large component of profit generation around the pharma, that's a genuine concern. And also at the same time, that pathway is incredibly complex and takes a long period of time. Then I think you've got the other area where you're wanting to look at alternatives where your intention to treat or your outcome is not really going to be as important. And those are things where some of those aspects have already been embedded into parts of Western medicine and culture. Like you couldn't walk into a pharmacy without seeing eucalyptus and menthol cough drops. Australia is one of has the most variety of eucalyptus plants of anywhere in the world. It's native to our culture. And that's something that's sort of spread. It's now become accepted and synonymous, but the outcome for the patient is probably not as important. So you might use it as an inhalation or a cough drop or something like that. The bar for that level of evidence isn't there. So it doesn't need to actually be registered with the TGA as a cough drop. It doesn't follow down that pathway. And that's why I think if there is some types of elements where you can actually get all of that culture and knowledge, and because Australia is unique, we're the only place that has the culture that we have, to embed that sort of knowledge into that sort of space, I think it has a lot of value. And at the same time, it needs to be culturally respectful, that you're not looking to commercialize or capitalize. But I think that's quite a rich area where you can actually look at all these alternatives potentially to Western medicine. And some of them are, like eucalyptus is one example, tea tree oil is another very good example. Everywhere it's used as a antifungal, antiviral, those types of things, using creams and ointments, lots of stuff like that. So I think that's probably a key part of it, and it's just taking it back to, well, where does it sort of fit in that patient's journey? So, and I think there's probably going to be an area of where you have those complex oncology scenarios where the patient might be going down that pathway where they've got Western medicine on board, but you want to be culturally appropriate, they need to have access to what might be traditional for them. At the same time, I think where you might have other alternatives to the patients where you want to look at other remedies for things that are not as crucial or not as, the bar's not as high, things like, diarrhea or constipation or those types of things. There is a lot of space where I think that could play a role, because there's lots of plants that could potentially have those properties and be incorporated in a culturally sensitive way. So I think it gets back to what is the patient outcome that you're trying to achieve, and what's the best way you can treat it, and trying to be as aware and culturally appropriate in how you do that.
Thank you. So what that sounds like to me is that there actually is a pathway that we can travel down. It's just a matter of how we travel down in a respectful way. Yeah. There's two more questions on our panel that will unpack that conversation a little bit more. So we will push along and ask the next one. This is back to Auntie Viv. And I want to read a little bit more about what I found in the article. It said this project provided a unique opportunity to work closely with Aboriginal traditional custodians to learn about the uses and stories associated with medicinal plants. While most of what they found is scientifically rigorous, what they also found is it still fails to address the social and political implications. What this means is very little of this research reflects interest in the peoples whose knowledge and identity are embodied in these plants, or offers any insights into the experience of the people in cultural and eco-political settings. Due to this, they observed Aboriginal people needing rights and legal mechanisms to protect their communities' cultural and intellectual property. This tells me we don't have a legal system that can enable us to truly empower Aboriginal communities across Australia, and makes me wonder, what is the first steps at a local level to ensure we're engaging in ways that truly empowers the people? Have you got any thoughts around this?
Really? That was a mouthful of question. One of the things, activities we did when we were doing the bush medicine course is the old days of drying plants and writing the information down. There's a sheet that you can use so that it's letting you know where your knowledge has come from. And there's a lawyer from Queensland, I know her surname's Jans, who's been doing a lot of work around this intellectual property rights. So there is a lot of work going on around that. And like our knowledge, our science is over 60,000 years or more. So our mob are, pretty have had that information for a long, long time and know the effects of it. But it's a bit hard to answer that question, only from my own experience. And, being told what the plants were, what they were used for. Like on the weekend, it's not digressing, but it's just giving you an example of how things are. I went out with a group of people called Activate the Wheat Belt, and they went to this farm that's just so degraded. There's, no bush left on it, except little scatters here and there, and the mob planted 100,000 seedlings. But the farm, part of the farm that they hadn't been grazed on or had no animals going through it, there's a lot of plants that are coming back that they hadn't seen there before. And so I was able to identify those plants for them and what they were used for. Some people wouldn't be able to do that. And so with all this working together, learning about medicine, there's still a lot of our plants that have been lost that we're never going to be able to find or get back because of all the clearing of the land. But I just think we have to do a lot more work around what you've asked.
I agree. Is there anyone else on this panel that has some thoughts on that question? Bit of a tough one, hey? Yeah, so I think what that really is saying that we do need to take our time when it comes to understanding what is the path and what do we need to consider. That Viv just shared us a story about clearing of the land that we haven't ever even thought about, and that is definitely something that needs to be considered. Our plants grow on in that ground. So I suppose it's just a little bit of time to think and get a bit of clarity around what that might look like as a group together, collectively. Let's try and do this, bring our skills and knowledge together to understand how to answer that question a bit better. Final question of the day, and it's turning to Michael and John. A little bit of a reading from the article again. This lot here, they had 2 case studies demonstrate community-driven research, not scientifically driven research. I want to point that out. They demonstrated community-driven research that links biomedical science with traditional knowledge can actually provide a tool that supports communities seeking to reinvigorate traditional knowledge, which in turn has created significant positive and empowering impact on the on the participants and their broader communities. What they also found is the need to further develop how-to resources for both Aboriginal communities and interested researchers. With everything that we've heard today and getting to this idea of how do we go about respectfully implementing bush medicines here at King Eddie's with the Aboriginal people of WA? Any one of you?
Thank you, Danielle, for inviting me, and thank you to Auntie Viv for sharing your experience. I guess from my perspective, I'm here as a representative of safety and quality. And from our point of view, just echoing what you said, Professor, you want to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our patients, making sure that they don't come to any further harm. Having said that, yes, we want to make sure that the patients are given every opportunity to expand their own spirituality, psychology, physicality. And how do we do that? I guess having the objective of introducing bush medicine is just the destination, if you like. And it's how we get there. What I've heard today is some, divergent opinions, but people with opinions and people with perspectives on how we perhaps would best do that. And I think the only way really forward is to make sure all those opinions are heard and done so respectfully. My experience of healthcare has been that we tend to be a little bit paternalistic, and we tend to decide on what should be done, and as a consequence we just plough ahead and do it without consideration for everybody that's quite often involved, certainly involved in their own healthcare. I think if we're going to do this and do it successfully, we've got to make sure that we involve everybody that's actually, for want of a better word, a stakeholder. And that's the scientists, the healthcare professionals, and above all, the Aboriginal community. It's their bush medicine. And I think that's what's been eloquently said here, that, you developed it, you own it, you know what it's for. Maybe there are two different stratospheres, there's the high level kind of cancer drugs, but then there is, a place, I think, for those second line drugs that we could incorporate. But how we get them in and how we get them in successfully is how we really need to be speaking. What we don't want to do in a paternalistic manner is just to be taking an off the shelf kind of product that pays no respect to where it came from and the people that have developed it. There's going to be a lot of give and take, and I think a lot of patience required. We've not always been great listening to each other, and maybe this is a great opportunity. I mean, looking at the broader prospects of reconciliation, this could be a perfect opportunity within WINS to actually create some trust and faith amongst the siloed mentality we have, and also with the Aboriginal community at larger. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautifully said. Does anybody else want to kind of add on that, or do we all feel like that was?
I'll just say that adding on to that comment, I think that it's the right time now. People are becoming more open to other ways of treating patients, and we've moved on from where the doctor knows best kind of thing, and a lot of those old-fashioned ways are slowly fading. Mind you, they were good at the time, but I think with a lot of the medical staff around, like the guy sitting here, the time is right to form those partnerships with our people to see how we can work together to take better care of our people. Doesn't matter where we come from. We're all humans, and we all deserve the right to good health and good and safe treatment and working together. So, yeah, I think we're ready.
I agree. We've got a question over in the audience, and then we'll check our online audience as well.
I love case studies, safety, pharmacy, old ways, professionals, the doctors that want to take care of us. Okay, my scenario is I'm a lady from the bush. I'm not in the city very much, and I've got my trusty bottle of bush medicine that I've brought with me from country, and I want to see it, and I put it next to me. And, oh, what's that? Oh, this is my bush medicine. Have you been taking your medicine? Yes, I took the medicine, but I like this too. You know, never condescend these old people. They know. Otherwise, you know, they're not going to. So a lot of times they don't hide those things from you. The only thing that they will get grumpy about is if you try to take it away from them. So they need that safe space. If it needs to be in a refrigerated environment, you know, like temperature type things, or if it needs to be stored in a cupboard. Also too, they might be in that much delirium and pain where you might think, oh, they might be having too much of that and they're getting sicker and sicker. So how do you, that governance of making sure that it's being administered properly with the overseeing of pharmaceuticals, so it's not interacting, and then also at the respect of, okay, you know, how much should they be having? Should they be having 30 mils or 100 mils? So, you know, working toward that. Well, when I'm at home, I have 100 mil, but maybe if you're here getting extra medications, we might lower the dosage. And working alongside and collaboratively with the Aboriginal expert in that area is helping that safety and quality and making sure that that harm is minimised.
Thank you. All things that I'm sure are going to be part of those conversations. Online, is there anyone in there who's put their hand? Kylie, please.
Hello, how are you? My name's Kylie Lawton. Auntie Viv, I thank you for your comments today and for your presence, and I'm really grateful that we had an amazing panel of people put together. I wonder, and my question would be, is there value for pharmacy and safety and quality to work with the people that Auntie Viv learned from and the course that Auntie Viv did to get that kind of sense of how bush medicine might interact with what we prescribe and how we might you know, understand that kind of stuff that Phyllis was just referring to about when people bring bush medicine to us?
Good question. Is that something that can happen?
Yeah. Well, they're racing now.
I've got a couple of thoughts about how you could actually do something tangible that we could implement in a way that would be a sort of like a quick win to sort of keep some momentum going. So I think, because I speak fluent bureaucracy because I work at the hospital, I think the main thing that you want to look at is, well, how do we operationalise this into what our clinical models of care? Because that's really what the doctors and the nurses, that's the language that they need to be able to deliver it. So I think in terms of a policy framework, there is actually already a policy that's set up for complementary and alternative medicines. It doesn't come up that often because it isn't often used, but it is there. So we actually, it's a rare space where we actually have the bones of a framework to use. And what that looks like is when you do have a patient who comes in, there is a reference about how to have those discussions and make sure that everyone is aware, and it does sort of have that premise where you do want to discuss it and make sure that it can be done safely and monitored in that way while you're caring for the patient. So I think that already does sit there. I think some of the bits that we're missing is probably around education around that, and I think it's mainly geared towards more so the health professional staff understanding what the options are, because when health professionals learn about things, they learn this is amoxicillin, it's an antibiotic, and you treat it for this infection. So that they don't have that language to go, all right, well, an alternative to that might be this particular plant or this particular option. And I think it would need to strike a balance about where they would be treating something, or it'd be either a scenario where they would be recommending that treatment to a patient as an alternative therapy if it was culturally appropriate, or for common treatments that might be routinely used for patients that we see in the hospitals, getting an understanding about what those are and an appreciation for it. So I think getting back to the bureaucracy space, the language that we speak well is guidelines and things like that and education. So I think if there was going to be a partnership where you could try to embed it in that way, it'd be looking at, well, what are the most common things that we do think as a partnership it would be effective to look at some alternative treatments for some common conditions that we might see in the hospital by offering it. Because if you give the health professionals that language, then they can speak it, and it'll also give it'll bridge. I think it would bridge that gap between introducing it into the Western model of care in that way. And I also think around more so the general education and appreciation around there are certain therapies that are going to be effective and appropriate to use. So like I was saying before, eucalyptus is a very, very common one. So just getting into that mentality, just because they haven't heard about this treatment for that condition doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. It just means you haven't heard of it yet. So I think those are the things that could potentially work in that space.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I concur. And I guess you should be part of the conversation, Michael. Clearly, you know about rules, regulations, and bureaucracy. Taking it back a little bit, just to your point, Phyllis, I guess it just lends itself to the argument that if a patient comes in that does have some bush medicine and are wishing to use it, and we're not entirely sure what that effect is going to be and how it might interact, then that's why we need other people on board that might be able to help us with that. And I guess, you know, Antiviv would be a prime example. Maybe one of the objectives could be that eventually we get a bush medicine pharmacist who can inform the whole of the hospital. And that may be the way to go. I don't know.
Sounds like people are getting excited, and I love the ideas. Ideas are already kicking into gear. It's happening already.
It is a rush. We started something here. So following on from what Michael and John has said, I guess going back to your question about reluctance comes from a lack of knowledge, but then lack of knowledge is a lack of lived experience. So the lived experience is, if I have a cough, I'm not going to take codeine because that's Western medicine. I know it doesn't work, it just constipates me. But I will take a Chinese cough syrup because I know it works for me. And I would advocate for that when I have a patient who has a chronic cough, and I'll say to them, you've tried this, it didn't work, did it? So why don't you try this? And I'll give you the name of it, and this is where you get it from. And that's only because it's a lived experience that it's worked for me. Not that it's going to work for everybody, but it's worked for me. And the idea of having a bush medicine pharmacist or bush medicine advocate, I think it's actually crucial, because I know amoxicillin works in certain conditions, but I actually don't know what will work for a different condition. Even if I have a list there that says, if the person has a rash, try this. I'm not going to actually prescribe it because I just don't know how to use it.
Thank you. How's that for being able to pass knowledge, right?
And like also when they bring their bottles of bush medicine in here, because we've had that experience, but I think it would be really interesting if we could get the patient to agree to maybe, okay, if they're having the bush medicine and they're on this, these are the drugs they're on, how does it affect the body, or how does it dilute the Western medicine that they're having? Like those sorts of things I think would be really interesting to follow up on, because we know that eucalyptus, our mob of use it since year dot. You can also, have a lovely cup of tea with eucalyptus tea. But we also know if you've got kidney problems, you don't have too much eucalyptus tea because of the tannins in the eucalyptus. And when we know all of that information, I think it would just really create a great partnership between our bush medicine and Western herbal medicine.
Can we get Antiviv on a contract already? I know we've gone over time, so we will start to end this panel, and anybody else who may have wanted to ask a question or make a comment. Is there anyone? Only one? Okay, we'll squeeze the one in, and then we'll close. Who was it?
Jilna.
Jilna? Yeah.
Yes. Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you, Auntie Viv, for sharing all your knowledge. it's very useful. Just a quick point in terms of, I guess, using bush medicine. I think the other point that we should also consider the cultural practices associated with using medicine, because Western medicine is generally just based on here's a medication to treat something, whereas I guess with Aboriginal medicine, even Chinese medicine, all the other cultural ones, there's a lot of association with cultural and spiritual practices that are taken on board in using medication as well. So if we're looking to integrate the use of bush medicine within the Western medicine, probably it would also be good to try to see how cultural practices are associated with it, and also how the use of healers in Aboriginal communities are used, and if that knowledge is in fact changed from people from different communities, because the information might not be the same from one person staying down south from another person staying in Perth, for example. So it's quite exciting to see that there's work already being started. But I guess these are just a few other things that we could just be mindful of as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge that is out there, but also lost, and also to see how we can empower both the health professionals and also patients to start openly having the discussions to use other therapies in conjunction with whatever they're already being prescribed.
Thank you, Jilna. Absolutely, and I love how wide you have taken that as well. Another consideration that absolutely needs to be taken into as we start this journey. So we will end this panel now. Thank you so much, everyone who has participated. And before we do end the panel, we want to leave you with the words of 2021 Senior Australian of the Year, Miriam Rose Ungun-Bowman. If I've said that wrong, I apologise. She says, "We cannot hurry the river. We have to move with its current and understand its ways. We hope that people of Australia will wait, not so much waiting for us to catch up, but waiting with us as we find our pace in this world." We hope today has brought clarity around the complexities of implementing bush medicines within our public health system. We hope momentum can be maintained with this conversation, and together we hope to find the solutions for keeping respectful and appropriate when implementing bush medicines. A big thank you to our audience and organisers. Please join me in thanking our bush medicine panellists for NAIDOC 2022. Get up, stand up, show up.